We're going to do a value study, so our primary concern is making sure that we have some good values to look at. Whether we're setting up a still life that we're going to draw from observation or take a photograph, we want to make sure that we have some quality lighting. So I want to take a second here and talk about what quality lighting looks like. We have a single light source coming from the left here, and we have very clear shadow areas on the right because of that. A couple other things here. We have some nice, interesting highlights, and we have very clear separation of values. And that will make it, it's going to end up making it easier, right? So if you were to have a bunch of light sources, it can get really confusing about where to place your shadows. If it's all overexposed, the end result might not look very three-dimensional. So this is what we're going for, a single light source with some pretty dramatic shadows. All right, now let's kind of go through this first step of how to start a drawing. So the first step is you're just thinking about contour lines. I just need to start with a line drawing, and some things to think about to help you understand the form that you're looking at are finding basic forms, finding the gesture of the form, and those 3 P's. So I'll get to that in a second. Let's just talk gesture real quick. I'm thinking about that line of action, that center line of the object. So the stem is kind of just going right up and down, but there's a little bit of a curve to the object, right? Kind of like that. Easy enough. A little gesture. And then if we're going to break this down into simple forms, you could think about it as a cube, right? And then you could think about the top of this pepper as a little bit of like a dome. So that might help you understand it. And when I'm talking about understanding, you're starting to get at those 3 P's a little bit. So a couple other things to think about when you're starting the drawing. That first P is parameters. What I mean by that is how tall it is and how tall that's going to be on your drawing paper. So you want to think about that right away. Give yourself a little square to work inside of, because sometimes you can start drawing and end up with a little tiny drawing, you know, that's just like an inch or something, or sometimes your drawing can get away from you and get way too big and maybe go off the edge of your paper. So right away, set your parameters, give yourself a square that you're working inside of. Understand the perspective that you're looking at. I see this front corner that's closest to me, and so that helps me know to think about it in terms of 2-point perspective. I can look at the bottom and kind of see those angles, and then think about my eye level, where that horizon line is. Now it's actually not this. My eye level is probably going to be closer to up here, and I know that because I'm seeing the top of the pepper. So I can finish this and kind of give you a look of the cube that it's sitting inside of. And then this is just the back corner right here. And then proportions, how tall it is by how wide it is, how tall or how thick is that stem compared to how thick is the whole pepper. And that's really that's the main things I'm thinking about when I'm getting started with my line drawing. And eventually we'll get to thinking about value, but that's not even on my radar yet. And some of these little specific lines in here, I'm not worrying about that stuff either yet. I'm just thinking about those most general lines and those most basic forms, and getting that down correctly to start with, and building a good sound structure that I can build on top of. As I'm getting started here, you can see I'm doing some of those things I just talked about. I have those two very light horizontal lines that kind of set my parameters. I just made that little swooping mark to get the general gesture of how that pepper kind of curves a little bit. And now I'm just trying to block in that kind of that cube. I'm just putting in the sides there, getting the top, and it's looking pretty blocky. It's really just focusing on the perspective and the proportions right now, and not trying to get caught up in too much detail. So this is a pretty good start here. I'm just really worried about those structural things. Now is the time to correct your proportions. If you see something off, change it now before you get a bunch of darker lines and value added. Take your time in this beginning stage so that you don't have to erase a bunch of progress that you made later down the road. As I get more confident with this beginning stage, I can work towards more specific lines and just a little bit darker, more confident contour lines as well. As I continue to work towards more specific contour lines, I get to the top of this pepper and it gets pretty complicated. And it's probably a little bit overwhelming trying to make sense of all that information. And so I just kind of want to talk you through how I make sense of it and how understanding the form and keeping in mind some of the things that we've talked about can make it easier to digest, easier to make sense of. You kind of know what to expect, and it'll make it more clear. So let's think about first each one of these little bumps at the top of the pepper. They're a simple form, and they're kind of just like a series of spheres. Okay? And then also keep in mind perspective. This bump back here is furthest away from farthest away from our view. It's in the very back, and then this pepper moves forward closer to us, and then this is in the very front. Okay? Now we know that it's just a series of spheres that are stacked on top of each other coming closer to us. And so I'll just outline that a little bit. So here's the very back. This one overlaps that. That one overlaps that. And so on. And then this one's in the very front, so that overlaps that. And then all of a sudden, what was a giant jumble of lines gets a little bit more clear, a little bit easier to understand. So I'll just go ahead and draw those. One little tip, something to keep in mind is avoid pushing down with the tip of your pencil. See how I'm kind of holding it at an angle? Avoid pushing down real hard with the tip of the pencil because I don't necessarily want any permanent lines. I still want to have some wiggle room and be able to adjust in case I need to. All right, there's my step one, all my contour lines, which means we're ready to move to our second step of blocking in. Now we're ready to start talking about value. And the first thing that I need to worry about is a terminator line. So I'm not worrying about any differences in value right now. I'm not even really thinking about a value scale of what's darker, what's lighter. All I'm thinking about is what planes are facing the light source and what planes are facing away, what planes are in the shadow. And the terminator line is the line that kind of shows me where that transition to shadows, where that happens. And so I'll trace this real quick so you can see exactly what I'm looking at. And it kind of goes down a little bit right there. Here, I will outline these highlights as well. And I want to make sure that I protect those and keep those light and make sure I don't get any value in those areas so that they can remain really bright because that paper is going to be the whitest spot in the drawing. So I don't want to mess that up with value. Do this real quick here. And that's the gist of it. I can get a little bit more detailed, but I'll stop there for now. There's also these little areas to consider. My pen can't exactly get them very well, but you see what I'm looking at. All right, I'll go through it on paper now. Now I'm just going through and drawing that terminator line that I just traced. I'm going to repeat what I said just a second ago about how I'm holding my pencil and the amount of pressure that I'm applying. I'm using the side of the pencil and making sure that I'm not making these real dark lines, but also what happens when you use the point of the pencil is you can leave an indent in the paper, and I don't want to do that. But anyways, we'll pause here. Here's kind of that linear stage of the block in where I just traced the terminator line around the entire form. Now that I'm adding value, I want to be conscious of the direction of my marks. In case any of these marks show through in the final product, I want to make sure that they're following the form. And I've talked about this a little bit, but I'll just show you exactly what I mean. Talked about it when I was talking about these bumps at the top of the pepper and planes a little bit, right? Like that plane's facing this way, and then the form turns and starts facing this way. You can see it a little bit more clearly in some of these big forms on the body of the pepper. You can see how they curve around like this, right? And then they're also going this way as well. And for example, if we're looking at this line, that's kind of a corner. And then when it turns the corner, the form starts curving this way. Same thing happens vertically. It kind of flattens out as you get to the horizon line, and then it's going to start coming up. Okay, so that's a little bit of like a cross contour idea too. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of an x-ray vision of what I'm seeing here. And now what I mean by following the form is this. As I'm adding my marks, keep that stuff in mind. As it's turning, my marks are turning. And so it's kind of riding on it, right? It's like a skateboard or a snowboard, and your pencil is just gliding across the surface of the form as you're adding those marks, and that will really help. The illusion in the end. Now I'm just adding in a flat value for all of the shadow. So anything to the right side, anything to the shadow side of that terminator line, I'm just blocking it in, just putting down a flat value, and then I'll use a brush to kind of smooth it out a little bit too. So that's a pretty quick stage. There you go. There's your second step. Now we will move into our third step, adding a full range of values. To begin this step, notice I have step 3A. I kind of broke it down into 3A and 3B. 3A is I'm just focusing on the light plane. And so a couple things here. Notice I'm using a brush. Hopefully by doing this, by just focusing on the light plane and just using a brush, will kind of narrow what you have to worry about a little bit. And really it helps you just keep your values organized, which can be, really useful. The main reason that I want to use a brush in the light plane is just because I can get that really soft lighting. Anytime I'm using a pencil to make a mark in the light plane, there's a chance that dark pencil line is going to be too dark, right? Because the values are just so light over there. Just a little bit of dust on the end of my brush will be enough. And you can use other things besides a brush. I like a brush. People use stumps are real common too, little blending stumps, sometimes a cloth as well. All right, moving into 3B. Now I'm working in the shadow planes. And I've been working with an HB pencil this whole time. And now I'm working with a 2B. You can maybe use a 4B. But I'm going to start pushing the values a little bit. I'm trying to get that full range where for a while it was pretty compressed, where it was all pretty similar values. I want to start going all the way dark now. And I'm just working inside of that shadow plane. And it can, if you notice my pencil, how much my pencil is sharpened, that's really useful for adding value because I can use the whole side of it. Look how I can just lay the pencil down, drag it across the paper, and it will leave a big mark instead of trying to use the tip of the pencil and making a whole bunch of hatch marks. I can just lay it down and cover big areas. All right, and then I'm just smoothing it out with a brush again. And that's pretty much the end of that step. Now I will move into this final step, step 4. I'll refine my values and add details, things that I haven't really worried about yet. I haven't talked about texture or surface details or anything like that. I save that for the very end because those are really specific and they're on the surface. So that kind of goes with the general philosophy of working general to specific. Now we're refining values, and so we should be constantly referring back to our reference. Whatever it is that we're looking at, keep checking back in. Keep making sure that you're matching, and just continue tinkering with them. And I want to talk a little bit about some vocabulary that will help you understand what's going on, and I want to show you something pretty cool too. So the first thing is that terminator line. Here's a little trick. It helps so much. It's crazy. There's the terminator line. And that's going to be the darkest area of the shadow. That's dark, right? And then on the other side of that, of the shadow side of that terminator line, you'll often see a lighter area, which is called reflected light. So we have the terminator line, and then you have like this area right there. And that's your reflected light. And you see it all over the place. We see your core shadow here, and then your reflected light here. And that will help inform you and make a lot of these decisions, and it is really, really useful. I want to show you something else though. When we're looking at those reflected lights, you want to make sure that you don't go too light with them, because they're still in the shadow plane. They're still darker than the light areas. The lightest dark is still darker than the darkest light. And you might think, that's crazy, but I'll show you it. Watch this. I go to this reflected light, which looks really light, right? Then let's go to the darkest light. I would say that this area is the darkest light. And look how much lighter that still is. And so you want to make sure that you keep track of your values and understanding how that terminator line impacts the relationship of values, that everything on the left side of that terminator line is going to be lighter than everything on the right side of that terminator line. So a little bit more nuanced look there. And we can look over at this reflected light area too. Even though this looks really light, it's even darker than the reflected light up there. So your eye will play tricks on you. And so just, it's a process of training your eye to pay attention to those little details and look very closely. So this is my final pass now, adding any of those details that I've been holding off on, and also just getting these values right, making sure I have a full range of values from all the way dark to all the way light. And so what you'll see a lot of times is that I'm switching between tools pretty often. I go from a 2B to an HB to a brush to an eraser, where I might go in and push the value a little bit more with a 2B, and then touch up a spot with the eraser. You can see I'm messing around with the terminator line right here and just making sure that I get all that as dark as I need to, that core shadow nice and dark. And then now that I added all that value at the top, I got to go through and do that to the entire form to make sure that there's unity between everything. And here you'll see me go in with that eraser and touch up the highlight, and then use my brush to smooth out the transition of values so that it's gradual where it needs to be gradual, and the transitions are smooth where they need to be smooth. And that's pretty much it here. Getting down to the very end and the finishing touches. So there you go. There is a tutorial kind of laid out and a whole bunch of steps. Hopefully that helped you guys. Let me know if you have any questions, if you'd like me to elaborate on anything else, or whatever you think that you need. So there you go. Good luck.